Thank you, honorable members. My apologies for this long break. First, had a visit by Speaker Raphael Trotman. Just want to bring your attention to his latest book, Parliament in the Republic of Guyana, second edition. It's going to be in our library from Monday. Honorable members, I haven't had the opportunity of seeing what it covers, but I know it's going to be excellent reading. And he walked with another very good friend of mine, Justice Donald Trotman, who and I go back over 40 years, including fighting for human rights in Nicaragua in the 80s. This afternoon, we welcome the 6 formers of Marian Academy, and their teachers. And we start this afternoon with our long-standing Member of Parliament, former Minister, Honorable Member, Ms. Volda Lawrence. Seems to be an after lunch issue since yesterday. Turn on and turn off again. Your time starts at 1:52.05.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon to the House. Mr. Speaker, with the vicious attacks against our women in this honorable House, I am sure the spirits of Jane Phillips-Gay, Janet Jagan, and Jessie Burnham, the 3 J's, are having a very hard time in recognizing this is the Parliament where in 1953 they stood with pride and dignity alongside the men. Mr. Speaker, as the Chief Custodian, I ask that you do not allow this crassness to continue. I suggest that there be some forum where all the women MPs can meet to exhale and find common ground to exist while in this House. Mr. Speaker, I have had the privilege to be in this noble House for a long time, and as such, have had the opportunity over time to listen to a number of budget speeches delivered by a range of ministers of finance, including the incumbent, whose long title, Minister in the Office of the President with Responsibility for Finance and Public Service, does not negate the fact that he is performing the functions of a substantive Minister of Finance. I have heard some lively, inspiring, pointed, upbeat, boring and jaded budget presentations. And alas, I make bold to say that the 2024 budget presentation fell into the last 2 categories, boring and jaded. Why? It was below expectations, underwhelming, as the government's blueprint development plan for 2024. It left us befuddled. Sir, it left us feeling cheated that this country's first $1 trillion budget, envisaged and with anticipation, was more of the same, done in a vacuum, and designed for a few, leaving little for the suffering Guyanese families on whom the minister anchored this budget. Mr. Speaker, which Guyanese families is the minister referring to? The average working class Guyanese families? I think not. Where is the vision, Mr. Speaker? Where is the hope for families? For people teetering on the brink of a cost of living precipice, wondering whether a little of the largest being fed to friends, families, the contractor class, and favorites of the administration would trickle down to them. It's a three-card trick indeed. Here is how it goes. The government anchors the budget on the Guyanese family as principal beneficiaries by presenting big numbers. But when examined and analyzed carefully, you realize the benefits are earmarked not for the average working class family, but for the group referred to earlier. Mr. Speaker, the Guyanese family cannot survive and does not deserve trickles in an economy sloshed with lots of cash. The minister should certainly be ashamed to do this at the expense of Guyanese families. Mr. Speaker,
Checking on one of the beep words.
Ashe, I withdraw that, Mr. Speaker, and I will proffer the word should think twice to do so. Mr. Speaker, I have heard constant talk of Guyana becoming a little Dubai and Dubai of the Caribbean. But imagine my reaction when I received my copy of the 2024 $1 trillion budget speech. I was flabbergasted, taken aback by the cover of the 2024 budget, depicting a darkness not unfamiliar to our power company, GPL. Is this what our future prosperity looks like? Dismal darkness, except for what looks like a landing strip for small light aircraft? Yes, I'm aware of the admonition, don't judge a book by its cover. However, I must say, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. Small wonder, Mr. Speaker, that the lines at the passport office and embassies have grown longer as more of our citizens, or to use the minister's term, Guyanese families, try to exit in search of a better life elsewhere. Oh yes, Honorable Ben, you have those figures. The budget team staying the course building prosperity for all appears as nothing more than sloganeering, an attempt to hoodwink and mask the reality for most Guyanese. But it is also a recycled team, microwaved and served as a fresh dish to an unsuspecting population. In 2008 budget, it was staying the course, advancing the transformation agenda, while 2012 was remaining on course. Mr. Speaker, the words staying and remaining connote a sense of inertia. While unintended by the minister, one cannot help but feel that we are marking time, staying and remaining in the same place as money is wasted on a hodgepodge of projects, skillfully being marketed as beneficial to the Guyanese family. Mr. Speaker, I iterate, which Guyanese family? I recall former US President George Bush's cheeky comment on his own administration's budget, saying, and I quote, "It's clearly a budget. It's got a lot of numbers in it," end of quote. And so was the Honorable Minister's 2024 budget speech. It had lots of numbers, and I may add a plethora of prose, but nothing of substance for the Guyanese family, unless, Mr. Speaker, the government is convinced that a budget that does not reduce income inequalities, nor contract award inequalities, A budget that does not reduce poverty is a Guyanese family-friendly budget. A lot about growth, but no development. Mr. Speaker, we learned that real growth last year was recorded at a whopping 33%, bringing the average growth rate for the period 2020 through 2023 to an impressive 40%. No other country in the world has grown at this average annual rate over the same period that was marked by the COVID pandemic and the Russian-Ukraine war. That we have been so blessed is due principally to the impact that oil has had on the economy. First discovered in 2015, with first oil production recorded in December 2019, oil has, within the past 4 years, virtually dominated performance of the economy in every metric or statistic considered. For example, oil accounted for 70% of GDP last year, from a negligible 2% in 2019. In terms of export earnings, oil accounted for 88% of merchandise exports, contrary to all the talk about the resilience of the economy. These two metrics prove otherwise. They expose the vulnerability of our economy to the vagaries of the finicky oil market. Mr. Speaker, these metrics show that we have an oil economy and not an oil sector. So we are vulnerable. In spite of the government's rhetoric, in spite of the growth in the size of the budgets, the returns of the non-oil sector appear not to justify the expenditure. There is no transitional development in this sector. It is still transactional, meaning import-based and not export manufactured based. For example, notwithstanding the huge investment made in the sector over the past 3 years and similar investments budgeted this year, the share of the agriculture sector has declined from 25% in 2019 to 8% in 2023. This calls into serious question issues such as the productivity of expenditure, the quality of expenditure, and the roles being played by policymaking, graft, and misappropriation. Mr. Speaker, it is estimated that Guyana loses about 40% of the expenditure on the Public Sector Investment Program, PSIP. In simple terms, 40 cents of every dollar expended on the PSIP is lost due to unproductive, unbeneficial activities. This is too high a price for the citizens, the Guyanese family to pay. Redressing this will require a commitment by the government to robust institutions manned by properly trained and motivated staff who are armed with the requisite tools for their effective functioning. But then again, sir, this government is famous for weakening institutions of government, transparency, and governance. May I remind the Honorable House of the savage attack by this government on the NRF legislation enacted by the APNU AFC government by removing transparency and accountability guardrails. Of course, we cannot forget the death of Sarah or its slow strangulation, another APNU AFC agency designed to track and recover stolen assets. Review of investments. Mr. Speaker, it cannot be said that the government is not developing policies. The fact is that many of the policies are either ill-suited or lack coherence. Citing a specific example within the agriculture sector, I read that we are in partnership with Barbados to build a so-called regional food terminal to be sited in Barbados. No details are available to the Guyanese citizenry. For example, Minister, the rationale, the cost, the ownership structure, nor how will it be operated and maintained. Meanwhile, another food terminal is to be located on the Linden-Soesdijk Highway, with a huge sum earmarked for in this 2024 budget. But we do not know whether a study was done justifying the purpose, intent, location, and further the relationship between the regional and Guyana's food terminals. Oops, I forgot that a senior government politician in this August chamber has an aversion to the conduct of studies to justify the feasibility of projects, especially those involving huge financial outlays, such as the Cherry Jagan Airport, the gas to energy project, and we must not forget the Skeldon modernization project. Sir, so much money is being wasted chasing some politician's dream that ultimately results in the nation's nightmare. It is the taxpayers' money that is involved. It is loans that we will have to repay that are involved. It is our hard-earned money in the NRF fund that is involved, sir. Given these various levels of involvement and financial sources, I can only urge that great attention be paid to getting increasingly higher returns for our projects. Then again, how can the nation receive higher returns from badly planned and executed projects? Mr. Speaker, I see frowns on the faces of my colleagues on the other side. Well, the recently named Heroes Highway is bulging and bumpy from poor construction and increasingly dangerous to drive on. There are no traffic signs, absolutely none. And that's only one. I am sure my honorable friend, Juan Edgel, can name many more. Here again, we can hear the threatening echo of development. Debt. Mr. Speaker, this part of my presentation allows me to transition into a major area of concern of the minister's budget speech. To the government's intent to raise the domestic and foreign borrowing ceilings, to change the withdrawal rules of the Natural Resource Fund, NRF, meddling with this fund again to make it even worse. I cannot believe that after changing the ceilings for domestic and foreign borrowings twice between 2021 through 2023, the government now proposes to raise the ceilings once again. This signals the government's continued reliance on debt financing, as evidenced by the projected stock of public and publicly guaranteed debt rising by 49% between 2023 to 2024, or from $4.509 billion in 2023 to $6.725 billion in 2024. The government's persistent tampering of the borrowing ceilings over the last 3 years is indicative of the absence of a medium-term plan and debt strategy, for which several international institutions have been pressing. Mr. Speaker, why doesn't the government's chief economist follow known economic best practices? Either it is an issue of incompetence, which I doubt, or a deliberate bypass to create opportunities for misappropriation and non-transparency. Sir, It is of no comfort to us, the taxpayers, the Guyanese family, that such borrowings are supposedly prudent and sustainable. Financial legislation. Mr. Speaker, given the fallouts surrounding the passage of the NRF, I never contemplated that the first amendments to the fund would have entailed changes to the withdrawal rules. Indeed, given the present discussions of the NRF being overstated to the extent of the unpaid taxes of the oil companies, a position which I am in agreement. I had hoped, however, that suitable amendments would have been forthcoming for the transparent accounting of the taxes to be paid by the government on behalf of the oil companies. Instead, what we are witnessing is the government's further reach into the fund for the little intergenerational savings destined for the Guyanese family. This budget talks so much about. At this rate, we will end up with an empty NRF. Mr. Speaker, it will be recalled that the government has so far extracted approximately 1.7 billion US dollars, the use of which has been hidden under an undefined, quote unquote, national development priorities. Given the existing formula, the government anticipates withdrawing another 1.1 billion US dollars to finance this 2024 budget. All of these amounts are based on previous year inflows into the fund. Mr. Speaker, I believe we on this side of the House will resist any change to the withdrawal rules that would lessen the amount for intergenerational savings. As a matter of fact, sir, among the changes we would like to see are monies being set aside as a buffer to counter oil price volatility and detailed definition of the use, and accounting for monies withdrawn from the NRF. In addition, this House must now consider a minimum percentage value in the NRF that must remain as intergenerational savings. And this must be protected by a two-thirds majority of this House. Yes, that's one of many constitutional reform matters for this House, improving the lives of Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, the literature tells us that development, and I quote, is the process of improving the quality of all human lives and capabilities by raising people's level of living, self-esteem, and freedom, end of quote. The government's budget for the years 2020-2023 have focused heavily on infrastructure, roads, bridges, buildings, among others. The 2024 budget continues this trend. Imagine, this is what this government calls development. In the main, people have become the casualty. In his inimitable style, Kaichor News columnist J.H.K. Lau, my favorite columnist, in his column of 14 January 2024, captures the situation thus, and I quote, "The people have lost that battle for first consideration every time. Cement and steel have resoundingly whipped Callaloo and squat. For every dollar given to the people, another 10 or thereabouts was cleared for the products that have handsome returns for ruling politicos, their circles and cabals, and the contractor class," end of quote. Mr. Speaker, this is an accurate portrayal of the plight of the bulk of the people of all races in Guyana. They continue to be buffeted by high prices, spiraling cost of living, and declining living standards. Whereas, Mr. Speaker, development is underpinned and identified by reduced inequalities, increased income distribution, political and social polarization, reduced poverty, and increased equality. The opposite to the development is true in super-rich Guyana, as we witness rising inequalities, rising income inequalities, rising poverty, and increased political stratification. Can the poor man access masses' attractive array of goods? Sadly, the no entry sign is boldly displayed. At Border Market, deemed his haven, he's at his wits' end to stump up a minimum meal. In the same breath, Mr. Speaker, how can the government talk about development and yet in the public sector limit the Guyanese family to a voucher system solely for accessing cervical cancer tests as part of the healthcare delivery plan? What about the other cancers which are prevalent in our country? Sir, according to WHO Report 2020 on Guyana's cancer country profile, 3 types of cancers are listed in double digits, namely breast cancer, 22.6%, cervix, 16.5%, and prostate, 15.6%. Mr. Speaker, the latter cancer is heaping havoc on our men folks, resulting in death. The family structure is losing an important element at a fast rate. I therefore call on the government, who speaks so much about the Guyanese family, to extend this voucher decision to cater to test all 3 cancers instead. Can you do it? Yes, you can. Mr. Speaker, the matter of public sector wages was aggressively addressed in this side of the House. But allow me to say that the government is making a grave mistake by not recognizing that the public sector, including defense, security, and parastatals, are productive entities. It is simply a question of a different measuring metric. The wheels of national development are driven by public servants and not the private sector. It is the public sector that ensures the government can govern and develop the nation. So to treat it as a stepchild, devoid of any respect, is political foolishness and disdainful. Finally, on this point, the notion that increases in wages and salaries are locked into lump sum to be delivered retroactively at the convenience of the government robs the public servants of the true value of any increase in their income. The government no longer has to await performance reports on the economy in the 3rd and 4th quarter to ascertain availability of monies to pay public servants in this oil economy. And yet, the government calls this development. No, Mr. Speaker, this is political vindictiveness. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2024 tells us that inflation was 2% last year and is projected to rise to 2.5% this year. Just by way of comparison, the Economic Survey of Latin America and the Caribbean 2023 puts inflation in the United States and the United Kingdom at 4.4% and 6.8% respectively in 2023, and projects that it will be 2.8% and 3% respectively in 2024. That Guyana can record a 2% inflation rate, given the open nature of its economy and given the high rates of inflation recorded by its main trading partners, is a remarkable feat, if that number was to be believed. But, Mr. Speaker, ask the Guyanese family, ask the consumer, whether the average or highfalutin, and he or she would scoff at the 2% inflation rate for last year because he or she feels it. Not when pumpkin comes to the market in a brownie suit like that of the Honorable Minister Ashley Singh at $1,000 a cut with his friends and family, boro, oko, corilla, cabbage, etc. Not when the prices of so many other basic food and essential items continue to spiral in 2023. Let us work with the official 2% for 2023 and the projected 2.5% for 2024. This would mean that the average inflation rate for the period 2021 through 2024 is 4.35%, compared to the average of 1% for the period 2015 through 2020 under the APNU AFC government. 1%. Mr. Speaker, this simple comparison indicates that people's incomes are being systematically eroded, consequently worsening income inequalities and poverty. And the situation is worse for those on fixed incomes, such as pensioners, especially NIS pensioners. These pensioners' last increase was in 2020, when the pension was increased to $35,000, exactly half of the then minimum wage of $70,000. However, Mr. Speaker, while ministers were enjoying a 23% in their already hefty salaries between 2021 to 2023, NIS pensioners like myself suffered severely as our pensions remained static during that same period.
Since we're dealing with percentages, you've used up 100% of your first allocation, and I'm going to ask the Honorable Member Jones to give you a 25% addition to complete.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Comrade Speaker. Comrade Speaker, I do move that the Honorable Member be given 25% more to complete her presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Member, you may continue to conclude.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It took a letter to the Stabboth News editor by my colleague, Honorable Annette Ferguson, who outlined the plight of these pensioners to prick the conscience of the government. This led to the enforcement of half the minimum wage of $86,150 and the grand announcement that the minimum pension of NIS pensioners has been increased to $43,075. Mr. Speaker, the government has not favored these pensioners. It was a right which they were denied for 3 years. I am urging government to pay the pensioners for lost income for 2021, 2022, and 2023, arising from the government's failure to implement the requirement. Equally, the government must announce adjustments to the pensions of those who are above the minimum pension, since those pensioners have not had an increase since 2020, and none was announced in the budget for 2024. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, the time has more than passed for this noble House to pass legislation to have pensioners and salaries indexed in order to always maintain a current value. That is a positive development matrix and not the negative ones outlined in this budget. Mr. Speaker, may I ask both honorable ministers of health and finance to address the grave mistake committed on the senior nurses of the Georgetown Public Hospital Corporation in 2022, whereby they are receiving the same salary as the junior nurses and technicians. You promised over 1 year ago to fix it. Please do so. I beg of you. Data. Mr. Speaker, a number of other measures have been announced in the budget. As desperate and incoherent as they are, we cannot be thankful for the morsel that has been thrown our way. We are not satisfied, and we will never be satisfied that in a growing economy, flush with cash, that we must be content with scraps. We will not be satisfied that in a $1 trillion budget, we the people are relegated to the bottom of the cement and steel pile. We love our families and friends in the diaspora, but we cannot continue to rely on them in the manner that we have done. It is shameful that in the midst of plenty, there is so much poverty. Not pockets of poverty as adverted to by Honorable Vice President Barry Jagdeo at one of his press conferences. According to Food for the Poor, the poverty rate, that is the share of the population living below the US equivalent of $5.50 a day, is above 38.8%. And among the highest in the Caribbean and Latin America. Another startling statistic is the intensity of deprivations in Guyana, which according to the UNDP is 30.3%. Mr. Speaker, what we are witnessing is growth, but no development. Essential features of an economy tanking towards resource course. So I would like to end on this note and call on the government to develop more people-centered opportunities for the Guyanese family, to provide really empower them, not with vain promises, as in your 2020 manifestos. You have some 32 of them here. Let me just give you a few. You promise more jobs and less crime. You promise to reduce cost of living. You promise free education in 5 years. You promise to promote an agri-energy industry producing bioethanol through sugarcane, palm oil, cassava, and corn. I'm reminding you, you promise to establish an arm's-length sovereign wealth fund insulated from political interference. You promise to establish a regulatory framework which is independent of politicians. You promise to criminalize non-disclosure of receipts of funds from oil revenues. And lastly, you promise 50,000 new jobs. All I ask, Mr. Speaker, is that the government be realistic. Be realistic. For Mr. Speaker, why should Guyana be a rich country of poor people, sir? This paradox can be successfully resolved with ingenuity, creativity, and a willingness to meaningfully involve all stakeholders. Can we do it? Certainly we can. God bless us all. God bless Guyana. Thank you.
Thank you very much.